Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today we're going to be starting a new chapter that's called business size. So, business size, what are the methods of measuring a business size? Now, business cannot be classified as a large business or small business directly, but yeah, there are some methods that we can use to differentiate one business from another to compare two different businesses to see which one is the better, which one is a larger business in terms of size. So, there are number of options available to measure business size. One of them, all of them, we are going to be discussing today in our syllabus. So let's begin. The first method is the number of employees. Number of employees is a very basic method. It is generally used for labor-intensive businesses to measure the size, because that what it means is that the greater the number of employees, that generally means the larger the firm. But that of course won't be a case in a capital intensive business, because it may appear small with this measure because there are relatively few employees as compared to labor intensive businesses. For example, suppose you have two factories, one fully automated which making Coca-Cola, and one which has 1,000 employees. Now the one which is fully automated, it might only need four employees, but the one which does not have any capital things, capital or machinery, so they might only have they they all rely on labor only, so they have 1,000 people. Now they both produce the same number of Coca-Cola, but in terms of this method, one might appear larger than another because there are more employees employed. So that's why we don't use this method when we are comparing businesses with labor intensive or capital intensive. This method is only used when both the businesses are labor intensive businesses. Now the next thing is sales turnover. That is called revenue as well, sales revenue. Now, if it is also of course very common to say that the one business that makes the greater sales is a bigger business than the one which makes less sales. Like whatever your total sales are. For example, if a business A, just a minute. For example, if a business A makes a sales of, let's say, $10,000. Okay, it makes a sales of $10,000 in annually, let's say, and there's a business B which makes a sales of, let's say, $5,000, or no, five. Let's just put it around somewhere close. Yeah, $8,000. Okay, they are just some estimates that I have put up. Now, when one looks at these numbers, when we are using this method, we might say that okay, business A is a bigger in size than business B. Why? Because this method we only see the sales revenue that each business generates. So what is that sales revenue? Sales revenue, it is the number of units sold multiplied by the unit cost. So it is useful for comparing businesses within the same industry, such as FMCG businesses. This is only useful for comparing business within the same industry. Now why is that? Because if you're comparing, let's say business A is a jeweler and business B is an FMCG business, so you can't compare both of these businesses, because a jeweler, one item, a unit item, might be somewhere around, let's say, $3,000, and in this, one item might be just a $1. So in terms of that, they have sold a larger number of units and hence got $8,000, which is very good for an FMCG business. But over here, they've only sold 3 to 4 items for in the 3 to 4 jewelry items. So for that, they have a very poor performance. So in that case, you can say that business B should be bigger than business A. But when we are using this method, we are in the deception that business A is bigger than business B, because we're only looking at the revenue. So that's why this method can be deceptive. However, it will also be deceptive if some businesses offer credit purchases. So let's say they might, even if they are in the same industry, let's say this business offers credit purchase to customers, and there is around, let's say, $4,000 due on some other customers. Okay, this is due on some other customers and they said they'll pay for it later, so that becomes an issue because you think that you haven't considered this 4000 that is due in this method when you're comparing it, so that becomes an issue. It cannot be used to compare the size of business in different industries as we discussed earlier, as one might deal with low value products like FMCG while others might deal with high value products like jewelries. Okay, so that's about this method. So you see, whenever I'm telling methods, I'm also telling about the drawbacks of the each method, because in the end when you are asked to tell which method is the most appropriate, the most better statement is that you don't use just one method, you use a blend of 2 to 3 methods to get a more justified answer, a more reasonable answer, or more, you can say, a more accurate answer. Now let's move on to the third method, that is capital employed. Capital employed is just the opposite of number of employees, because in over here we look at the value of all long-term finances invested in the business, like but not limited to machineries. It's not just limited to machinery, it's also other long-term finance that is invested, but generally we consider machineries. So over here we look at how much capital a business has. It is only useful for comparing businesses that deal with similar products or services, as different businesses have different capital needs. Like a hairdresser needs less capital as compared to an optician. So let's assume they both have the same, you can say, number of employees, and but they both vary. The qualification needed for both of them is quite different, and the sales turnover will also of course be different. But the capital, when we use the sales turnover, that is a more appropriate method when we are comparing hairdresser and optician. But when we use this method, in this method also this can't be used, because optician might appear much, you can say, bigger business than a hairdresser, just because they have a greater, just because they're, what you can say, just because they have a more greater machinery, so greater capital needs. Okay, sorry for that. So next we have is market capitalization. Market capitalization, it is the value of the issued shares of business calculated using the formula current share price times number of shares issued. It is only useful applicable for public limited companies which are registered on stock exchange. It can also be deceptive as the share price keeps fluctuating and the number of shares issued varies from a business to business as per their needs. So different business issues a different number of shares and the price keeps fluctuating because it is a measure of the business performance, and hence this is also not a very good measure. Now finally we have market share, which is generally the most used method. It can be defined as the sales of the business expressed as a percentage sales of the industry. So we just say how much sales your business has done when you're comparing the sales of the whole industry. Let's say the whole industry does something like 40 million sales. Now how much did your business contribute to that 40 million sales? If it contributed 2 million, then that's not too good. But if it contributed like 20 million, that means 50% of you have 50% market share. So that's something very good. Now, a business with a higher market share generally means it's a larger firm. However, it is not only applicable for business in the same industry in a particular area like city, country, or state. Because if you're comparing, you say, some market share of two different industries, which are businesses in two different industries, so they don't lie in the same industry. Let's say an automobile industry and a food industry. Now the food industry might have a greater market share, let's say 30%, but the value of that market share might be something like 2 million. But the one which is an automobile industry, it might have a 10% market share, which is less, but the value of that person is very large, let's say 10 million. So that's a huge difference. Comparing market share of business in different industries cannot give an accurate measure of the business size, as business might have higher market share but operating in a small industry, and vice versa, like the example I just gave. So that's all over here. Just go through these points that I've written down, and that should be good enough. Thanks for watching. Allah Hafiz.